Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our hosts an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers beat the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun.
Okay, well, we are really lucky today to be joined by Pav Gill. Pav is, probably one of the most famous whistleblowers on the platform, on the planet, who was a critical person who brought the truth to what was going on at Wirecard, and we're very, very lucky to be joined by Pav. I'm going to give a little bit of background on Pav, and then we'll get right into it. So Pav is a lawyer. He has originally a lawyer. He's got a law degree from the National University of Singapore, and he subsequently worked as an associate for Allen and Overy, Clifford Chance, and King and Spalding. After serving as senior legal counsel for Gobert, he joined Wirecard as its first head of legal for the Asia Pacific region. And really, after a short time or a period of time at Wirecard, he really brought the world's attention to the infamous Wirecard scandal. And Wirecard went from a company that I think capped out around 25 billion euro of market cap that effectively went down to zero. And Pav was critical in bringing the truth to the light in terms of what happened at Wirecard. And he is also now the founder and CEO of the Confide platform, which is a system that allows organizations to confidentially receive, investigate, and resolve risks. As it's critical for all organizations, obviously, especially public companies, to have a platform to allow people to speak in a confidential way. And again, it's important that companies get this and are able to respond to issues appropriately. And the Confide platform certainly is critical for that. But Pav, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on this.
So the way I wanted to start is, I'm fascinated, obviously with your story, but it takes somebody with a certain character in order to do what you did, to kind of stand up and expose the truth. And as we're going to get into it, it's one thing to do it. It's another thing again to face peer pressure and scrutiny from your fellow employees and all that sort of stuff. It's another thing though to have issues with respect to your personal safety as well, which also came to light. But what I'm fascinated to know, Pav, is when you look back and kind of reflect on this, and you go back to your early days. If we start with your early days as a youngster, I'm interested to know, what built you up in order to be able to speak up and frankly deal with this situation. Was it something that happened in your early days? Obviously, your mom was really critical in terms of raising you and instilling you with the right values. Or was it something that maybe you learned prior to joining Wirecard in your work experience? So maybe we'll start with the former. If you talk about your early childhood, Pav, was there anything in that early childhood that kind of prepared you or built those ethical values that would allow you to withstand and deal with what happened at Wirecard?
Yeah, that's a great question to start with. I mean, when I was young, my mom's a single parent and I'm the only child. So I guess from a young age, I was forced to man up, if you want to call that, put it that way. So, as a young kid, I used to pretend to be like, it's a protector of the family or whatever in my tiny ways.
Yep.
And I think that kind of also over time played a huge role in making me who I am, because I used to see like my mom, my aunts, and everyone, being so nice, being kind, and also, because of that being taken advantage of, whether by friends or by colleagues. So I made it a point to always be on the lookout and not want to be in that situation. It's so much easier said than done. And I think Wirecard was one of the ultimate tests for that. Like, would you really want to be put in a corner, be beat, even after you left the company? Would you still tolerate this nonsense, right?
Yep.
Like at some point, even if you're an animal, I would say if you're cornered, you would have no choice but to turn around and fight back, or just do something and not cave. So I think that's probably what happened in the Wirecard situation. Um, and yeah, it's. I mean, at the end of the day, even if you distill it down, I think fundamentally people should have a right to say what's troubling them, to clarify things that don't make sense. It's just a fundamental right of free speech in that sense. And that's also crazy. Like, why is speaking up in a corporate setting so controversial?
Yep.
Not in the street, right? Like, if I saw a crime happening in the street and I did something about it, you'll be hailed as a hero. But if you did the exact same thing in a corporate setting, then that's suddenly a very different kind of viewpoint.
And that's a really good point. Why do you think that is, Pav? Why do you think if you call out a crime in the middle of the street, your front page of the newspaper saying this person is it like you say walking on water because you stopped a crime in progress, but when you basically did almost the exact same thing at Wirecard to shine a light on exactly what was going on, some of the criminal activity, you're shunned, and not just shunned by the people who are doing this. Obviously, you would expect them maybe to be upset, but shunned by security regulators, government organizations, like all these other folks that you would have thought, again, if it was a different scenario, you'd be front page of the newspaper. But all of a sudden, because you're in a corporate environment, it's the complete opposite. Why do you think that difference exists?
I guess it's because you're being paid to exist in the organizations. So because of that, there could be some kind of feel that, look, you shouldn't be biting the hand that feeds. But the issue here is that that's fine. Like, you may not be biting the hand that feeds, but if the hand is trying to kill you and stuff, then at some point that gets thrown out the window, right?
Absolutely.
The whole dynamic changes. So I think that's why organizations, maybe perhaps because they're paying people, they feel that people should have a sense of, untraveled loyalty, regardless of what's going on in business to them. And anything that's deemed as putting the business at risk, that's viewed as being disloyal or being a snitch or untrustworthy person, which is also kind of crazy because even if your organization doing pretty wrong things, it would be in your interest to have people speak up.
Absolutely.
So that it's kind of like a early warning system on yourself, even as a fraudulent company, right? Like, hey, whatever you guys are up
Absolutely.
to, it's being extremely visible to your employees. So either you stop what you're doing, or you maybe super refine your criminal ways. I don't know, but so that's why I'm saying all companies should be encouraging a kind of safe culture to allow people to speak up, because no matter how you slice and dice it, it's really in their own interest to have that flagged first and deal with it before, as you saw in the Wirecard case and in many other cases, it escalates outside, and then you find yourself in like a bigger mess, right? Because now you've got legal PR nightmares to deal with and a whole bunch of other issues.
Absolutely. And if you're with the board or the audit committee or some of the more senior leaders, and again, there were people out there who were telling you that there were issues with your CEO and things like that, you would certainly think that you would want to know about that in order to action what was going on. And then maybe just talk a little bit as well, Pav, about your experience before Wirecard. Was there anything, leading up to your experience before Wirecard that could prepare you for what was about to go down? Like, I don't know if you worked in an environment perhaps that had really good, a good control environment, good ethical standards. Obviously, you worked at one of the top law firms. I'm sure, they had good processes and procedures and perhaps were world class in terms of how they did things from an ethical perspective. But we talked about your early days as a youngster, but then in your early professional days, was there anything that kind of prepared you for what, or provided a benchmark for what you were about to get into at Wirecard?
I mean, my career has always been super interesting, even from the law firm days, right? Because I worked at Skadden, I've worked at Allen Overy, Clifford Chance. And, this wasn't just in Singapore, but it was in the whole of Asia Pacific that I was covering. I spent a few years in the Middle East. This was after Dubai crashed. Um, and, the kinds of things I've seen in terms of cultural clashes, in terms of crazy ways of doing work, having had to navigate a lot of these things from as a lawyer
Yeah.
in a law firm, I think it really opened my eyes, because it's very easy to say what's black and white, but then when you're actually on the ground and you're dealing with customs, cultures, and all kinds of other, things thrown in the mix, that's where it really puts a gray on the black, right? But then I think the question in Wirecard's case, or what a counsel should be able to do, is obviously tell when that gray becomes a big red line.
Yeah.
And so, having done and seen a lot of these kinds of crazy things from a work perspective, I think it's what probably built that experience. I think in Wirecard's case, it was very unique because, this was just flat out like a criminal organization. And it's one thing for them to have been cooking the books and doing all kinds of other stuff. But, once it got into things like trying to make you go away, trying to attack your credibility, do a HR case against you, and all these things, I think that's where you realize, like, okay, now this is a battle between you as an individual and a bunch of people with no rules who don't play by the books, right? So I think that's where that was pretty unique,
Well, and
so to speak. And I guess,
and to give
yeah,
people some perspective as well, to give people some perspective, think, well, what do like from a safety perspective and things like that? Well, one of the key executives formerly of Wirecard, was, there's basically evidence. He's a Russian spy who is now living in, somewhere in Moscow or somewhere on the outskirts of Moscow, right? Like it's almost like some of this stuff at Wirecard is almost stranger than fiction, but it's true, right? Is that, you were crossing paths with some serious folks who, again, could probably action you out relatively quickly if that's what they wanted to do. Like it's pretty scary.
yeah, it is on hindsight, and that was what I was going to say previously. Towards the end of my what I was saying just now, which is the fact that I was in Singapore. I think it's what made it even environmentally or situationally more safe, right? Because if I was in another country, say I was in, I don't know, a third world country, developing nation, or even in the US, where guns are so easily available,
Yeah.
I could just have been knocked down, and no one's going to think this is related to a company issue, right? It could just be a fight at a bar, could be a random stabbing or an accident,
Absolutely.
or like what you've seen in Boeing and OpenAI. It could just be like, oh, this guy suddenly decided to kill himself. So that's the scary bit. Whereas obviously in Singapore, like nothing much happens from a serious crime kind of state, right? You don't really see murders taking place or any of these things. So I think that's what maybe gave me that sense of security, that what I was doing is fine. But yeah, I think looking back, if you're talking about Russian mafia, GRU assets, and a whole bunch of other stuff, that's where you realize you've kicked the hornet's nest, maybe unknowingly. And then maybe to that extent as well, they must have known that, okay, this guy maybe didn't know, and the way the company treated him was really foolish, and that resulted in him having to blow the whistle. But because he actually didn't know the extent of the fraud and who the real players behind the scenes were, maybe let's just like put it aside, right? But then if he had, I think it would be very different if I actually knew like exactly what was going on, and then now I'm trying to do these things. I think that's where it gets into a whole different territory where, that's where revenge and other kinds of motives kick in. That's what, from my philosophy now, is like, okay, I kicked the hornet's nest, and this is what happened. Maybe now it's really time to just talk about lessons learned and what we can do, what companies can do, instead of really trying to figure out and still poke holes and find out what happened at Wirecard. Because then I think, whoever's behind all these things will be like, okay, this path guy is still not going away.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's time we deal with it.
That's scary. That is terrifying, frankly. Now people might be thinking, well, Pav, how did you end up here? You have this wonderful background of work experience, working at all these big law firms. You transitioned into the corporate world. Take us through that day where, again, you're kind of, I don't know, sitting in your desk or sitting at home having a cup of coffee, And I don't know if it was a recruiter or something you saw online that said, man, this Wirecard job looks cool. I think I'm going to leave leave wherever I am. I'm going to go there. Take us back to that day, Pav. What was going through your head when the Wirecard opportunity first crossed your desk?
Yeah, I mean, I was really happy because after my time in the Middle East, I came back and I wanted to be in the fintech space. And what I joined was a very, I would say, a seed stage kind of startup. So massive kind of, I mean, I was desperate to be in the fintech space, right? Because as a kid, I was always into tech. And then from the law firm side, I was doing corporate finance. So the finance and the tech and the fintech thing kind of made sense at the time. So I took a massive pay cut. I went full for the experience. And then obviously, where when Wirecard came about, it was an opportunity to kind of rebalance everything. And given it was a listed company, it was a German company, like everyone has that. I mean, it's stereotypical, but it's meant to be a great place to work. Like everyone's supposed to be doing the right thing. They're supposed to be, decent people and stuff. So, and the autonomy with the role was great. So a recruiter called me and said, "Hey, this company's looking for their first legal person to be looking after Asia Pacific and being on the ground here. Would you be interested?" And that's when I said, "Yeah, for sure." But when I looked at the website, like, I mean, the company did payments, right? But I didn't fully grasp just off the website what they did. And as a finance lawyer, you think you know what payments is, which is completely not true because it's a whole universe of its own. And when you get into it,
Yeah.
that's when you're like, okay, this is learning from scratch again. Having to grasp with concepts like what's merchant acquiring, like that term itself doesn't make any sense on the face of it. Like, and then processing and yeah, all these different payment things, right? Like Visa, MasterCard rules, what are they? What are schemes and stuff? But I think what Wirecard said to me was like, look, we've expanded so crazily in the globally and especially in the Asia Pacific region. We really need someone to be our eyes and ears on the ground to assist with that. And they had just purchased Citibank's merchant acquiring business in the region. So they also needed to kind of elevate to banking level standards, get licensed in a few jurisdictions. And yeah, so when I joined, I thought like, I guess this is a typical scenario where over expansion or too quick an expansion has resulted in potentially integration issues resulting from whether it's cultural aspects in the region and also on and so forth. So that's where I saw myself adding value. Like, look, I could navigate the company through, like just objectively see what's going on, and everyone's going to be um, working towards the same objective, which is trying to sync and synthesize this massively growing beast into a very smooth flowing kind of organization.
And when you look back in hindsight now, and you look back to that time when the recruiter called you and you were starting to gather diligence and talk to the folks, this and that. When you look back in hindsight, do you look back and say, man, there's certain things that have happened where I should have known? You know what I mean? Like certain red flags. And I'm talking about before you even, put your name on the dotted line and said, I'm going to join Wirecard. I'm talking about in the diligence phase of you trying to figure out if this was the right spot for you. Was there anything in hindsight that you would look back now, several years later, and say, man, that should have tipped me off, or now when you look back and say, you know what, I could never have expected that it was going to play out like that.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible. I mean, massively successful companies, or actually even companies that are on a sudden growth trajectory, they always have a bunch of haters out there saying they're doing so and so. That was the case for Wirecard. Like you had short sellers doing attacks on them. You had an infamous Zatara report, which was released about a year before I joined. Um, but if that's debunked and nothing's come out of it other than a temporary hit of the stock price and a recovery that happens after that, then what's going to happen? I mean, what are you to say about anything else, right? And I think this is the whole issue with many organizations where it's really about difficult because even if a company is negatively in the press, but if they are fighting it successfully, then that's just a call you need to take to go in and see whether that's true or not. But for me, that was not even like in my mind when I joined Wirecard. It was really going in and having that autonomy, having that mandate to look after 13 countries in the region and work for a regulated financial institution, which is what Wirecard was. So, yeah, I mean, can always have bad press, but if you're successfully navigating it, that was exactly what Wirecard was doing for 20 odd years, and very successfully, in fact.
So, because I'm fascinated to know if you had any advice for people out there who are, obviously, people get job opportunities all the time, and the issue I think is even with AI, are some of these job opportunities even real, which is a totally different issue than really what we're talking about here. But is there any advice for people out there to say, you should do X, Y, and Z before you sign on the dotted line? Or is it just, what, do as much research as you can, talk to as many people as you can, and then, like you say, you just have to make a call. And you know what? In your case, again, like you say, Wirecard was a prominent German organization. This wasn't like a little startup. This was like a prominent company within Germany that was thought to be the next tech, Tesla or whatever you want to refer to it as. This wasn't, this wasn't like, again, some mom and pop shop. But any advice for people out there, Pav, in terms of, if they're looking for that next job, what they can do to make sure that they don't, end up at the wrong company?
I think it's really difficult because a lot of people look for jobs because of the paycheck. For example, they need to earn a salary, and the economies have been terrible for the last several years, right? It's not, and that's actually also leads to one of the common questions that I face, which is, oh, if it was so bad, why didn't you just find another job, right? Which is also something that's leveled against many whistleblowers. Why did you stay in that situation when you could have just found another job? And I think this is the misunderstanding, which is it's not so easy to just find another job, especially the more senior you get. You can't just like walk into another firm, right? Like I'm not Elon Musk or someone. So I think that's the reality which most people face. If you want the job for the experience, for the pay, and a whole bunch of other factors. And then there's also the mindset that, okay, even if the company has got some bad press, but if I'm going in and I'm not doing anything bad, then what's the point? I mean, why would I have to care about it? It's also, I mean, to use an example, like when Binance was hit terribly in the news, you still had so many people happy to join it after that, because there's also that element, if you're in legal risk compliance, for example, that, okay, the company has gone through a tough time. Maybe I can go in and try to be one of those that then makes it into a 2.0 and sets it on a different pathway, right? I can be part of that recovery, that restoration of integrity or whatever. So it's quite complex. I mean, yeah, and it also depends on the role. So that's another thing which I think is very valuable to think about, especially for people in control functions like legal risk compliance. I always tell them, like, if something's really smells bad, like it's truly dodgy, then if you're in those roles, you need to think twice. Because, for example, if you join a successful startup that's doing some pretty crazy things in, say, crypto or somewhere, you must always understand that if the company fails, the CEO would most likely get away with it. People will say, okay, he was this crazy guy, a lot of money, tried this, it didn't work, and he's off to his next venture. But then the way your peers would look at you if you're in legal risk compliance or even internal audit, that's going to be a whole set of different questions, because they'll be saying, like, what in the world were you doing in this company all this while? Like,
Absolutely.
so that's something I think people need to think about.
Absolutely. Well, you take about, again, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, you start a company, it goes bankrupt. It's kind of learning along the way. It's part of the process. But if you were a finance person and you were the chief financial officer of that company that went bankrupt, that's certainly not looked upon necessarily as saying, oh, hey, that's just part of the learning process. That, you might lose your professional designation over that. You know what I mean? Like if suppliers are out of mud, like that's again, it totally depends on the role and how people on the outside view that. If it's a great point. I agree with that 100%. So you sign on the dotted line, you start a Wirecard. Again, you're responsible for the Asia Pacific division. Lots of stuff going on. Entrepreneurial, even though it's large and high profile, it's still an entrepreneurial company. So you're, I'm sure you're working long hours. Stressful days, busy time. But when did the first red flags, the preliminary red flags, like, was there, again, a couple things where you look back in hindsight, once you got in the inside and started to get under the covers there, where just the early days you're saying, you know what, like something's not looking right here, or the way I'm getting treated, little bit different than maybe, how things were in the past. What were sort of that early experience? And was there anything once you started getting in there that started to just give you a bad feeling about things?
I mean, it was strange from the point of view of how things were done in the finance department, for example. So I was told to get to know this guy called Ido Kurniawan. He was the Indonesian male that was effectively the international CFO, um, focusing very much also not just in South America, but also on Asia Pacific. And he was the first time I got to meet him, because he's always on a plane. I don't know what he's doing as a CFO on a flight every day, but he, he was. We went for lunch, and because I was told to get to know this guy, apparently he was like super powerful, right? So when I met him, he seemed pretty normal, like jovial, and he introduced himself by saying during that conversation over lunch that he was married to a drug dealing family in Jakarta. So so to me, it's like, okay, is he showboating or trying to like just pull a jab, right? Um, and I was like, what do you mean? So I burst out laughing. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, no, 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 I'm really serious. When I met my father-in-law for the first time, he put a gun on the table and he said, if you don't treat my
Wow.
daughter-in-law properly, I mean my daughter properly, I will, yeah, you know what's gonna happen. And then he went on to further emphasize how, drug dealers are very rare in that city particularly. And so, and so on. So to me, it's like, why are you telling me all this stuff, right? I mean, you do realize you're the CFO type guy, and you're always on a flight from South America to Australia, New Zealand, and you're married to the underworld. So if that's not a red flag, I don't know what is. So that was the start of all these weird elements, which eventually led to one of his own staff calling me one evening and saying she was afraid because she was being forced to do illegal transactions by this guy, and she didn't want to do them anymore, and she really needs to speak to me. So that was how everything started, as the internal whistleblowing case at Wirecard.
And when you get that call, like, what are you thinking? Like, are you thinking at that point that, oh, you know what, she's just blowing things out of proportion? Like, there's no way that this stuff exists. You know what? Obviously, you want to pursue it. You're a lawyer. You have a professional requirement to figure out what really happened. But what's your first reaction when you get that call? Is it what? There's no way this is happening. Or is it what? Like, based on everything I know, like this is starting to this kind of makes sense.
No, it was more of the smoking gun moment, because a lot of things over time were just not adding up. Like, for example, when I was looking at the financials of all the subsidiaries in Asia Pacific, they were all loss making for the last 4 or 5 years. But yet Wirecard was declaring hundreds of millions in EBITDA numbers for Asia Pacific as well as Europe. I mean, virtually equivalent amounts. So everyone was wondering where the money was coming from, because on paper it was in the red, right? So, and of course, with guys like Ito and just weird stuff happening in general, um, flexible accounting in terms of numbers always being presented. Like, we were going to do a license application in Hong Kong, and the initial set of financials we got were very different from the next set of financials we got and stuff like that. So I think this was the time which changed everything, because finally, instead of just having bad smells, you're actually having something objective that's being presented to you by way of a whistleblower who's bringing evidence to you saying, look, this is what I have. This is what I need you to look at and tell me what to do. So I think that's also very key to always remember, especially I think for people in our space, which is, it's not normal, I would say. I would hope it to go into companies and look for dirt. I think, yeah, things may not make sense ever in most companies. Like, there's always something that's missing here and there, but it shouldn't be normal to then go in and try to forensically dig into dirt for you about your own company. You're usually just trying to do your job until something objective comes to your desk, where you're like, okay, now this is some meat and substance that I have, which I can now work on and conduct an objective investigation. And I think this is when that opportunity presented itself. And yeah, so that's how the whole thing started effectively, as the uh, investigation that I undertook in the company.
And how did your first meeting with the girl go that was bringing these concerns to you? Like, how did that meeting play out?
Well, we did the meeting outside of the office, like away in a cafe, and she was very shaken up, like legitimate fear.
Yeah.
And she wasn't a junior employee; she was very senior. And I think and what made it worse was he was actually hired by the very person she's accusing of doing all these things. So I think that makes it even scarier because if you're, you're in that situation, you have real fears as to what if the person finds out, would they take revenge, not just on me, but on my family,
Yeah.
say back home, for example, right? So I think this is where it got real. And she was giving, I mean, because of the seniority, the level of explanation actually was good. So a lot of stuff was being explained. And right after that, I told her, like, look, I will never reveal who you are, which I haven't until today. So I called her Bobby as a code name, and I went back to my desk and straight away I called Munich Legal and I said, look, as in my supervisor, I was like, look, we've got an internal whistleblowing case. Now, what do we do from here? It seems pretty serious. So that's when I was given the go ahead to conduct an investigation over the course of the next few weeks, engage an external law firm so that it could be an objective analysis by a non-Wirecard party. The understanding and rationale was if a reputable law firm looks at forensic data, that would force the company to act because they have no agenda, they have no political bias, they're just advising you based on what they are looking at, right? So that's exactly what happened. Unfortunately, when the general counsel got involved, which I was always told knew what was going on, but the day I called her because Bobby was freaking out, wanted to go to the press and the police and all these things, that's when I realized she has no clue. And she was employee number 13 in the company. And that's when she said, oh, I have no idea what you're talking about, but just send me what you have and we'll deal with it. And her way of dealing with it was to take everything and run to the board and tell them, do you know what's going on?
And when you're going through this, are you thinking at this point that, hey, look, like the way this is going to play out is that, we're going to do, like you say, a full investigation. This Ado guy's going to be fired and everything is going to be, everything is going to be okay. Like, how did the investigation ultimately come to completion? And was it at that point that you were kind of in a degree of shock as to how things actually played out, maybe compared to how you expected things to play out?
I thought it was a slam dunk case because we were given access to the inboxes
Yeah.
from day one of Ido and a couple of his senior folks. And what we saw in there was just like, it's irrefutable evidence. Things like them emailing logos to themselves and creating fake invoices, fake contracts, round tripping funds, sending money to themselves and stuff. So this is like slammed up, like I would say even half normal company would have suspended them pending investigation, but that never happened, right? So even the preliminary report from the law firm listed potentially 15 offenses in there, I would say. We're talking like money laundering, forgery, all criminal breach of trust, like all these kinds of things. And yeah, that was what went to the general counsel and she didn't act on it. In fact, what then happened was they started trying to find a way to tweak the investigation to become a gap analysis exercise, where because they didn't want to fire the law firm, they knew people like me knew what's going on. They thought that okay, maybe now the law firm can carry on digging and showing us all the various ways we are screwing up, and so we can go fix it. So that was what eventually happened. And in the meantime, in parallel to that, that's where they decided, okay, let's spend the next few months trying to force Pav out the company by making his life as difficult as possible. And just to be clear, like during this time, not only was no one fired or suspended, Ida was actually promoted. So there was a global email that went out promoting him to VP accounting and controlling for all the hard work that he did. And that was the ludicrousness and just upside down elements of what was going on in the company.
And during the time, did you have any interaction with some of the more senior folks in Germany where you could, have an opportunity to share your concerns, one-on-one, or was that, never part of the equation. You weren't really permitted to speak to the you know the kind of the core HQ in Germany.
No, because I was reporting to the legal team in Germany, so that to me was already the HQ.
I see.
Um, but when they started to go after me, that's when you realize you can't do anything because it's very sensitive, right? The information you have, the investigation you've done, you're not meant to share it with your colleagues. You're not meant to discuss it. You're not even meant to do anything. So that's the whole isolation aspect of being in that situation. Because even though the company was now starting to take active steps, like, shouting and screaming at me in Singapore, the director here, giving all kinds of threats and then creating this fake HR case against me, which took 3 months to investigate. So all this stuff you're just fighting it on your own because you can't say anything. You can't go to your colleagues or wondering what the hell's going on. You can't tell them this is why the company is doing this to me because of this investigation and all that stuff, because then you're breaching your professional obligations, and that itself can get you fired. So I think that was where it was very difficult. And obviously you can't go outside and talk to your friends about it either. So then question is, what do you do in that situation? And the only thing I could do in that situation was make sure that the law firm was able to carry on doing the fuller investigation, and just really withstanding the heat. And that goes to what I said earlier, like the people will say, why didn't you leave at this point when it's so obvious? Like, why do you have to stay there? Yeah. And to me, it's because the law firm was saying, look, just hang in there. It's just a matter of time. The more we come across, the more obvious it is. And so let's just hang in there, because at some point the company will be forced to act and you'll be validated. So that's why I was just withstanding through all these things until Ido came back one day after the 4th or 5th month, and he wanted to have lunch again. And that's when he said, look, we want to send, I know you've been very busy the last few months, but we want to send you to Jakarta on a business trip. And yeah, let's see, when can you go? And I was like, what do you mean? What's the trip for? And when is it? He said, doesn't matter when is it, like whether it's in 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months, you have to go. But you have nothing to worry about because you know who my father-in-law is, right? And that's where and that's where it became real that the company is trying to do this. And what made it worse, and this was now my last week in Wirecard, was because during that week I received 2 anonymous phone calls on my landline. Say, hello, is this Pav Gill? We understand you're being told to go to to Jakarta. Don't go, you won't come back. And they put the phone down. So that's where obviously I didn't want to go. And I told the director in Singapore, I'm not going. And that's when the company was very happy, because finally they had a business reason to force me to resign or fire me, which is I'm not going on a business trip. So that's how I resigned.
Jeez, that is just absolutely terrifying. There's no other. And people say, like, why didn't you leave? Like, look, like the reality is probably 90% of the people maybe would leave in that situation. But Pav, I'll bet you in your situation, there's a part of it where you want to see this through. Like when you see something wrong, you want to right it. You know what I mean? And I can't believe that you would have thought that everybody in the company was like conspiring against you. You know what I mean? Like, you must have thought, man, there's somebody in here that actually wants to know the truth. You know what I mean? That, again, when you see something, when you see a crime that's happening in the streets, yeah, 90% of the people will probably turn and walk the other way. But then, yeah, you have those 10% of the people that they do it because it's the right thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, there's an element of, again, just wanting to be on the right side of the law. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but what can these people do it themselves, right? Like no one wants to go if these things are coming from the very top. And I think this is really important, because I think this is also why a lot of frauds continue for so long. Is because if the company is doing well, if everyone's earning a good salary, if nothing untoward is there, shareholders are happy, management is happy. It's whether the staff are happy or not is irrelevant, but everyone's winning in that sense, right? So why would anyone want to then now go and try to turn things upside down or just find this issue, even if it's an issue, like why waste time dealing with it? And I think that was a very good strategy externally from Wirecard standpoint as well, because they were telling regulators for 20 years, like, and also their investors, like, why are you guys complaining? Look at how successful we are. Look at how fast we're growing. And like, ironically, is because we are growing so fast that we've got all these teething problems that we need to catch. I mean, we need to fix. So yes, legal and compliance needs to be fixed, like in every company, but just give us a moment to do that. And that moment just never appeared, right? So I think that was how they got away with it, which is they tried to paint the whole thing as they're a victim of their own success type issue. And people fell for it because why? Why the company? Everyone's earning. I mean, at one point it had 40,000% growth, right? If you look historically backward. So then why would Germany complain? Why would the regulators and investors complain? I mean, it's a success story. It's a PayPal of the whole of Europe. And now you've got like a couple of employees that came across certain issues. No one wants to get involved in that kind of stuff, I think, because then their job's on the line. And at the end of the day, like from a purely rational economic standpoint, everyone's just acting in their own self-interest, whether you're an employee or you're someone else, whether you're an investor, your employee, or anyone else, right? So I think that's also why it wouldn't have made much sense. While people can empathize with you and like, just give you a shoulder to cry on, so to speak. No one's really, I think, going to be wear that cape and go fight your battles for you in these kinds of situations.
And what was the decision process to kind of be there's what you tried to push this case through, you tried to work with the law firms, but at some point you made the decision to say, look, I need to reach outside of Wirecard in order to bring this to the attention of others. What was the thought process and kind of the pros and cons? Because I could imagine you're probably thinking about this saying, man, there's a lot of pros and there's a lot of cons to going through this step. What was the decision-making process surrounding that?
Yeah, so once I left the company, they still didn't stop. So they were sending people to follow me and my mom. And then they were setting up all these fake interviews with friendly firms because they knew I needed a job. So these firms will reach out to me and say, hey, we are looking to hire this role. Would you be interested? And during that interview, they would just ask me, they'll spend the whole interview time asking me why I left Wirecard. And they'll say things like, oh, don't worry, we've always heard like weird stuff about the company. It's okay, you can tell us. We'll also then understand why you only lasted, 1 year in the company and stuff like that. But I didn't cave because I knew why they were doing that, so that I breached like an NDA or a leaving agreement or something. And then the company would have the opportunity to continue making my life hell by suing me for doing that.
So, and
So,
Pav, I just want to ask you a
s-
question
yeah.
just on that. Why, like, that to me makes no sense. To me, the best thing that could have happened for Wirecard is that Pav Gill goes off, gets a new job, and never thinks about Wirecard ever again. Like, to me, that would have been like the best outcome. Why go through and try and make your life a living hell? Because they're just going to get you worked up. Even like, if you remain unemployed, like what do they care? I would have thought the best thing for them is that Pav goes off, gets a new job, and never thinks about Wirecard ever again.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it falls down to arrogance, especially on the local director side in Singapore, because he came into the company because they bought his small payments company out in Singapore and Malaysia, and I think he was the one. He got into that whole inner circle, became rich, and it got to his head, kind of thing, probably. And so I think he was the kind of guy that would tell HQ that don't worry, I'll deal with this guy, leave it to me. He's just like, whatever. It's not a threat. I'll sort it out. And I'll just kind of like play with him, right? Which is why he did the HR case and he was doing the shouting and screaming. And then also, I think after I left the company, he probably thought it'll be some kind of like, I don't know, just part of his continuing behavior to try to do this. So ironically, I think if not, as you said, like if all they had said was, look, it's not working out, why don't you go on gardening leave? You'll get paid until you find
Exactly.
another job. We'll make sure you give a good reference. Um, None of these things would have happened, right? So it circles back to the very first thing that we said on this podcast, which is you don't want to create that angry, isolated, disgruntled employee who finds that he has no choice now but to take you down from the outside. It's completely avoidable because once you create these kinds of wounded people, then there's bound to be some kind of impact. But I think once you also are very successfully criminal, so to speak, you think you're too big to fail, or you've been getting away with it for like so long. I think that's where also you have that sense of, I don't know, overconfidence that nothing's going to happen and all this will be noise. We've dealt with it a million times. Like, what is this one person going to do, right? If he does, we will maybe sue him, or we will continue to just. I mean, in a weird way, it's like no different from bullies, right? Like, bullies will just keep having a go at you until one fine day they meet the wrong person that just fights back and suddenly comes crashing down. And yeah, so I think that's exactly what happened. Completely avoidable. And also why I spend my time now telling companies, stop doing this, stop creating more paths. You don't need to. And yeah, that's probably what happened.
So you're out there trying to get another job. They're trying to put blocks every single way. You can't interview anywhere without them giving you a million questions of Wirecard. And like you say, they're trying to almost entrap you into disclosing confidential information that would then result in a lawsuit from Wirecard. Again, that would be an incredibly stressful situation. And at what point do you say, look, like, I need to take this a step further now, and really, start to disclose what's going on. So what was kind of the thought process behind that step?
Yeah, so at this point, my mom got really upset.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the thought process kind of got accelerated, at least on her side, when she one day said, look, the company's not letting us move on. You're the sole breadwinner of this family, and I've had enough. I'm going to do something about it and teach this company a lesson. So that's where things went very downhill for Wirecard, which is because they literally pissed off a angry mom, I would say. And, it's never a good idea in any context, right?
agree.
Like, just don't upset your mom or your wife, I would say. It's typical. I mean, it's such a perfect definition of or example of hell has no fury, like a woman scorned, right?
Agreed.
So this is exactly what happened in this case. She decided to be the tiger mom and said, "Look, I'm going to find a way to solve this out." And so that I left her. I told her, "Look, I'm going to leave you to your own devices. Just remember that I am a lawyer, and I'm still trying to look for another job." So very quickly, she made friends with Claire Brown, who's the journalist behind the 1MDB scandal, the government of Malaysia scandal. And Claire said that she knows the Financial Times has been working on this for the last 5 years and getting nowhere. So that's how, but they have the resources to deal with a case of this magnitude. So that's how Claire put us in touch with Dan McCrum at the Financial Times. And yeah, one day I came back and my mom said, "Look, we're meeting the FT this weekend." No, why would I speak to a journalist, right? Like, I'm a lawyer. I don't even trust these guys. She's like, "No, we have to do something." And in fact, the strategy actually was thought out. So we sat and we debated this, and the thought process was it's very practical. So what are the other options? The first option is you can go to the police and lodge a report of fraud and all these things. But then the issue here is that whether it's the police or it's the regulator, for example, you may file it, they may take your report, but they could also very simply or very likely just chuck it at the back of the queue, and then it just sits there until someone decides to actively open an investigation. So then you're just left having to continue for an unknown future battling the company. So kind of status quo in a way. Right? You have no power over the process. And in fact, you could also be exposed because you never know, like someone may call the company and say, "Hey, guess what? One of the employees now made this report. Like, what do you have to say?" And immediately the company knows who that person is, right? So she said the other alternative would be the media. And because Singapore is a very hypersensitive country to foreign press reporting on adverse events taking place within the country, so he said if we go to someone like the FT, and if they actually publish something, Singapore will be forced to act. And that's exactly what happened. So, within 3 weeks of the first 3 articles that the FT published, the Singapore police raided Wirecard. There's a very public radios in the papers. Wirecard claimed it wasn't a raid, that they invited 20, policemen to the office one morning in plain clothes. just come in and take their mobile phones and their hardware. Uh, that's a crazy thing. Like we are laughing about it, but people believed, and the stock market didn't react. I mean, it reacted, but they believed that what Wirecard said is not a raid. So that's how insane it is.
Now, and were you surprised, with these early articles now? Like, did you think, look, once the Financial Times starts writing about what I have to say, like this whole house of cards is going to come crashing down? That's not again what happened. Is I think it took a little bit of time. Were you surprised that things didn't maybe play out immediately the way you kind of thought they were going to play out once things hit the Financial Times, and you'd say, look, it's no longer Pav Gill who's saying this. It's the Financial Times, which is a very reputable organization, and they're not going to put something out unless it's been vetted and reviewed and backed by evidence. Were you surprised things didn't unravel quickly after articles in the Financial Times?
No, they did, but what I didn't expect was the way the German regulator would react, right? So right off the bat, like on the first day of the first article, they said this is not a Wirecard problem, this is a short selling problem, and it's an Asian problem. So they went out their way to vindicate Wirecard, which is not what regulators would do typically. It's
Yeah.
not the playbook. The playbook would be just to make a generic comment saying, we understand allegations have been made against one of our listed companies. We are going to investigate, but till then we have no comment. You don't right off the top of it say this is not the company's problem, right? Without even having checked anything. And what made it worse and really upset me was the fact that before the first article went out, we had actually sent a dossier of all the key contracts with the explainer to the regulators in Germany and Singapore and all these different countries, including the auditors of Wirecard, and why they then behaved the way they did made it really dubious, because either someone didn't bother to read or they just didn't want to look at this company for whatever reason. And that's why, and also they then started going to investigate DFT, right? And they banned short selling on Wirecard stock and all that stuff. So that's when I realized, like, look, this is not a battle against Wirecard anymore. You are actually fighting multiple powerful entities, whether it's the auditors or it's the regulators or it's whoever that's refusing to want to investigate and is protecting this company, right? They're actively protecting them and they're going after people that are exposing them. And also the Germans were looking at this from as though, the vibe was that, okay, it's a jealous UK paper trying to take down our fintech success story. Maybe Brexit sentiments were still there. So that's when I realized, okay, I need to do more. I can't rely on the FT alone. I need to change the perception from within Germany. And that's when I reached out to Süddeutsche Zeitung, the SZ, the newspaper. And also I created a Twitter profile where I was starting to post things that journalists couldn't post. And then it took 1.5 years to really bring the company down with all these various facets and channels that I was using to try to coordinate these things. And yeah, it wasn't an easy time. I mean, my mom had a stroke because she was so stressed. And as part of the stroke scans, they found she had stage 2 lung cancer, had to cut off half a lung. And that's when it became very personal. And I think that was also the motivator as to why really had to be seen till the end. Because once we went down this path, like I really wanted to make sure that there was an outcome out of it. What the outcome was, we didn't expect, which is the company completely collapsing as a top-down fraud. But it did, right? So, and just to conclude on a very long response, I think everyone should also remember that Wirecard is a rare case of successful whistleblowing, because a lot of times whistleblowers get exposed in the process. They get retaliated against. The whole machinery of the corporate versus the individual kicks in. Law firms, lawsuits. They drain your financial resources. They ruin your reputation. But I think in this case is different because I was anonymous all the way until a year after the company crashed. So that's when I came out publicly the day the Sky documentary, Wirecard, $1 billion lie came out. And I was in the documentary, our mom's in the documentary. So that was the day we decided to say, like, okay, it's safe enough to come out and let everybody know who it is.
Do you think, again, you talk about the stress, like it's unimaginable. You talked about your mom, and I can just imagine the stress on you would just, again, like you just, it's unimaginable. Do you think you could have pulled off and done the same thing if you actually lived in Germany? As opposed, like at least in Singapore, look, the Singapore government like raids the offices, the second they find issues there. Obviously, they didn't do that in Germany. It's almost like they took the opposite approach. Do you think you've been able to go through the same process if you actually lived in Germany itself?
No, I don't think so. I think Germany was a stakeholder in the whole thing somehow. Because it makes no sense. Like, honestly, if we had given the information on a platter, all anyone needed to do was just look. If you looked, you would
Yeah.
find a whole lot of stuff, right? Like, at the end of the day, even when we look back, Wirecard was saying its money came from just 3 companies. None of these 3 companies in reality existed as a type of company that would be able to generate not only 500K or 1 million in revenue, much less 1.9 billion in profits, right? So anyone just needed to do that, but they didn't. So then it goes to the whole question as to whose fault was this, right? Was it failure of internal controls, legal risk compliance, supervisory board, which exists in Germany, or was it a failure of external agencies like the auditors, market participants, for example, who kept still till the last day saying buy Wirecard stock, or the regulators and law enforcement in Germany? Why these guys didn't want to act? Why, despite having the information to act, they didn't want to act? I think these are all troubling indicators. And if I was in Germany, there's no way I'll navigate that for sure, because yeah, I mean, you're right in the lion's den, right? Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's yeah, no way to come out of that unscathed.
And I don't know, the straw that broke the camel's back. Again, I don't know if there's a straw, but obviously, when they went looking for that 2 billion of cash and they couldn't find it, that was certainly one of the events. But what was the kind of the day of, where you felt, kind of validated? Was there a particular day where you say, you know what, finally the truth has come to light?
Yeah, the day the company crashed.
Yeah.
I mean, I was actively following it because I was active on Twitter. Again, like all these things I was doing as a side gig. I actually was working in jobs after that. So it's great for stress relief, I guess. Like do your work and then figure out how to expose Wirecard in the evening. Uh, and Twitter and stuff is perfect for these kinds of things because you can be completely untrammeled and uncensored there.
Yeah.
But when it actually did crash, I think because it was such a insane journey from the inside to the outside, and then a different kind of outside where you're now coordinating these things. Uh, to see it really come crashing down, I think was just indescribable in terms of outcome and validation, and also, pride. Not because you took down a company, but because the truth prevailed at the end of the day,
Absolutely.
right? Like, I think that was it's just this whole mix of emotions, which, yeah, just can't be described, and it's unbelievable to even think about now. So people always say, like, do you regret what you did? I was like, no.
Regret,
I mean, everyone goes through crazy stuff, right? But it's just what you make out of it and what you do out of it, that shapes who you are as a person.
Were you surprised to the extent of it? Because like it would appear that Wirecard again grew up to about 24 billion euros in market cap, pretty large company, and it would appear that the real Wirecard was a fraction of that. Like they're almost like there wasn't even anything there to begin with, or not much. Maybe a little bit of a payment processing business. I think it sounds like again during the wind up process, maybe they sold off a business unit here and there, but really there wasn't much there to justify that 24 billion euro of market cap. Were you surprised of the extent of it? It's almost like, the old saying, you start pulling a string back and like the whole thing just starts to unravel. You know what I mean? Like pulling one little string. Could you have ever thought that it was literally like the whole company that was at, that was basically, part of this whole matter?
No, I think that's also a point which is still unknown. Like that's the billion-dollar question, to put it that way, is whether there was something or there was nothing. So obviously the FT and the official narrative is that this whole business didn't exist, the money's never existed. But then on the flip side, there's the other side, the defense side, which says no, it did. But then the question is, where and to whom did the monies go to? Who are these people who were uh, dealing with these funds? What's the start and end point, right? And I think that's where it's a catch-22 for Germany, because if you say that Wirecard didn't exist, I mean, in terms of the business and everything was a sham, then that's the safer option, but it's still messed up. But if you say that it did exist, and then the question is, okay, and who are the recipients of all these? I mean, it's flat out money laundering type issues.
Yep.
Who received those funds? And it's hard to also say the company had no money. I mean, it definitely had a lot of money, because otherwise it wouldn't have expanded in such a way. It couldn't have bought Citibank's prepaid card business in the US. It couldn't have bought their merchant acquiring business in APAC. And it couldn't have acquired all these random companies. Like, I mean, there's an extent to doing that kind of fraud, right, at such a huge scale without being exposed. And so and also not to forget, like, people had spent many years trying to expose this company through very reputable short selling attacks and questions. But there clearly was a concerted effort on the part of many powerful players to not want to look or to shield this company from external scrutiny. So the biggest question is why? Like, I mean, if this company really had no money in it, then why would people be taking such great lengths to protect it, right? So I think that's where we still don't know. And that's what the defense of the CEO, Marcus Brown, is. He's saying, no, this thing is, money's existed. There's no way they didn't exist. And just to put a scale, like if you actually go into the company and you forensically analyze a lot of the data sets of the financial transactions, you can use, even today, you can use the best AI software, you can screen all of them. They would say that the transactions are all legitimate. And we are not talking like a data set of 200,000. We're talking about a million, like at least a 6-digit data sets of permutations and variations in transaction volume, right? So in order to create that kind of fake stuff, you either need to have a very sophisticated military intelligence type backing to do that, because there's just not something you can get like a warehouse of people to come and sit and create. It's just not possible.
And what your first, or one of your first points of contact there we talked about was Ito there. What happened to him? Like we know one of the CEO, it sounds like he's on trial. And we'll the jury is still out in terms of what is going to happen to him. The other, kind of the co-CEO or COO or whatever, it sounds like he's kind of made an escape into Russia. But whatever happened to Ito? Where is he in will he ever face any, face up to what he had done, or where's he now?
Well, he's on the Interpol red list. So after the third FT article came out, he absconded from Singapore before the raid, just a day before the raid or day or two before the raid. So apparently he was sent to Dubai on a business trip. They paid for like a villa for him for 6 months and stuff. And from what I heard, he's probably still there with a new name called Henry. That's apparently what he goes by now. But he's definitely on the red list. So is Jan Marsalek, the COO, who's been very busy. Like, I mean, Jan Marsalek was even in the UK press like a couple of months ago for being the mastermind behind this Bulgarian spy ring that was happening over there. So, yeah, I mean, so at the end of the day, like, what was Wirecard's purpose? Was it a money laundering operation between, I don't know, Austria, Germany, and Russia? Um, but the question is, if so, then for who? Um, because it's not normal. Like, I mean, the way Jan Marsalek escaped from the country was even insane. Like, the company has crashed. 2 days later, he's having dinner with Austrian intelligence. They fly him out on a private jet to Belarus, and then he makes his way to Russia. Like, you don't, if your company just crashed and you're the COO, you don't call someone in intelligence and say, fly me out the country because this has happened to Wirecard, right? They would only help you if you were an ally of sorts, or you had involvement with them somehow, or you were critical to what was happening, that they can't let you get arrested and stuff. And why Germany didn't put an arrest warrant out for him is just another question. Um, so yeah, it's there's all this other side of it, other than, okay, this was a financial company and then it crashed and then that's it. But I think there's a lot of interesting questions that have not been answered in that sense, and maybe we never will find out.
Do you place the blame at one individual or one organization or anything, Pav, when you kind of think through it all? Or is it really, there's enough blame to go around here? There's a lot of parties that share in the blame of everything that happened at Wirecard.
I don't know. I mean, it's just a blame thing, right? Like, if a group of people that created a business that's had its roots in porn and other vice industries. I mean, if that's the birth of a company and it's what made the company rich for the first 5 years, obviously there's a lot of connections to people in those industries which tend to be pretty shady. And then the question is, then they got a reverse, the way they got listed was also questionable. It was a reverse merger with a defunct telephone operating company, from what I recall. That's how they got listed. And then, so whether it's by design, if it's by design that this was meant to be a fraudulent company from day one, or a company engaging in nefarious activities somehow, financial or otherwise, then that's not something you can blame, because that's what the founding team or the people that ran the company actively set out to do, right? So it just happens that I think from their perspective, given the size of what happened in terms of the growth, the number of employees now, the scale of the business, I don't think in their wildest dreams they thought like, oh, one day this one person in Singapore would have direct forensic access to inbox data and other kinds of information that would actually bring the company down. Because all the while they always were fending off attacks from external parties who could say whatever they want, but didn't have like hard evidence. Right. So I think that's what they never kind of foresaw. So I think that's also why when the FT started publishing again, with once I gave them the information, they probably thought the same thing, like, oh my God, Financial Times is back again, let's just deal with it. So I think that's what they weren't prepared for and really took them by surprise.
Got it. Now, to wrap things up here, maybe just talk a little bit about the Confide platform, because I'd be interested to know kind of what inspired you to start this initiative, and how the Confide platform, is hopefully a critical tool that will, again, maybe play a part in preventing the next Wirecard. You know what I mean? Or at least, a bad business is doomed to fail. But certainly not the way, Wirecard went down. Maybe just talk about what inspired you to create Confide and kind of the slot that it's tended to fill in the corporate world.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing all these global keynote speaking events, discussing what companies can do, what processes they can look at, what business leaders can do in terms of culture, compliance aspects, and all these things to prevent another Wirecard. And then the EU whistleblowing directive came out. And basically that directive is so extensive, it pretty much renders just your policy of whistleblowing ineffective. You need to have way more stuff in order to deal with these things. So given I was going around having all these talks, and I've seen how companies, how challenging it is for organizations to get information from their staff or even their vendors and whatever is happening. I mean, if you think of even internal audit, it's so hard to actually get information that something bad is going on somewhere in the operational or supply chain. So I've seen those challenges, right? And I've seen it from the whistleblowing side. So it just hit me, why not put my experience into a product that would benefit companies, people, and lawmakers? That's how Confide was born. So what it is I think the biggest problem today is if you ask any company, if something has happened, like a bad thing has happened, do you have a single source of truth to go to see how something started, who dealt with it, and how it ended? The answer is probably no. But they would say we have various solutions doing different things. We have, for whistleblowing, just a hotline or web form. For grievances, we've got like the HR tool or whatever process. For AML investigations, we've got screening tools and all these things, right? Um, but there's no one-stop shop that deals with all this stuff. So that's what we built. So basically, Confide is an end-to-end case management solution that deals with various operational compliance things such as whistleblowing. It's end-to-end, receive, manage, resolve, and comply. Not only receiving it, but being able to carry out the whole investigation on platform in one place for that audit trail. Same for grievances. That's another product. Oftentimes, there are grievances chucked into whistleblowing lines. It's a different policy, different workflow, different reporting line to the board when you're reporting metrics. Things like conflicts of interest management is super manual, right? Like, how do you raise
Absolutely.
a complaint about a COI case? How do you, if you're a bank, like give approvals, like someone wants to invest in a stock? How do you give that approval, tag it to a T+2 timeline? How do you then track the trading desk? So all these things are what we have created so that there's just one place to see all the risks and anything that comes in. You have a bird's eye view on what's going on. So that's effectively what we're building at the Confide platform.
Yeah, and and the reality is if Wirecard had something like that, maybe they're still around today. Like you say, it is in the company's best interest to deal with these issues properly. Maybe if they listened to you and they had a platform like that, maybe they could have dealt with it, and maybe they would still be around. And obviously a lot smaller, perhaps, than what they were, but it wouldn't have played out the way it played out. Because like you say, I what you said right at the outset of this call, I totally agree. Is that it's the company's best interest to get to the truth, and to figure out what happened. Not to, it's always the cover up is worse than the crime. There's certain truths in life. I think that's one of them. Is that the cover up is always worse than the crime. You know what I mean? So. And the other thing too is, look, a lot of these big companies, when you have 50, 60, 100,000 employees, things are going to happen. Things are going to happen that, but it's how you deal with them that's important. You know what I mean? So anyway.
Yeah.
But Pav, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time, hearing your story. I would encourage people to check out Pav, check out the Confide platform, and learn a little bit more about Pav's story at Wirecard. Because again, it is something, again, extremely courageous to do in order to speak up. And again, it's not just the stress of dealing with colleagues and stuff. It's literally, at one point, you feared for your life, and even your mother's life, which is pretty scary stuff. But Pav, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.